Something is happening in our world that feels bigger than politics, bigger than disasters, bigger than the chaos we see every day. It is as if history is accelerating, as if events are unfolding faster than we can even process them. People everywhere feel a strange heaviness in their hearts, a sense that something extraordinary is approaching, something humanity has been warned about for centuries. And the most unsettling part is this: many of the signs we were told to look for are no longer distant, theoretical ideas. They are unfolding in real time, right in front of us. Before we go any deeper, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe if you love learning about Islam, because what you are about to hear may change the way you look at the world. For so long, people assumed the end-time signs were far away, belonging to some remote future that would never touch them. But today, the world feels different. Every headline, every global shift, every moral transformation hints at a reality that generations before us could never have imagined. The winds of change are no longer gentle. They are fierce, fast, and undeniable. When we look at the descriptions preserved in the teachings of Islam, we begin to see a pattern forming, a pattern so precise and so eerily accurate that it forces every thinking heart to stop and reflect. This is not meant to scare us, but to wake us up. Because once you recognize the signs, you can no longer pretend the world is the same. One of the earliest transformations that begins to reveal itself is the erosion of truth. Not just the lies people tell, but a deeper collapse of honesty that spreads through every level of society. We live in an age where misinformation travels faster than lightning, where entire narratives can be manufactured and believed before anyone stops to ask for proof. People speak with boldness even when they have no understanding. Emotion has replaced logic, and loudness has replaced wisdom. The teachings of Islam describe a time when trust would be lost, when people would hand authority to those who do not deserve it, and when liars would be believed while the truthful would be rejected. Look around and you will see this unfolding everywhere. Society has reached a point where truth is no longer the standard. It is merely an option, chosen only when it benefits someone's agenda. People prefer comforting lies over uncomfortable truths, and the danger in this is enormous, because when honesty dies, justice dies with it. And when justice dies, society begins to decay from the inside. This decay is slow at first, almost invisible, but eventually it spreads into politics, education, media, relationships, and even personal identity. People begin to search for truth in a sea of illusions, not realizing that they are being guided by voices whose only goal is influence, not integrity. This is exactly what our tradition warned us about, a time when authenticity would be rare, when deception would be celebrated, and when the world would lose its moral compass. Connected to this collapse of truth is another powerful sign, the rise of voices without knowledge. It is one of the clearest descriptions of the end times, a warning that people would seek guidance from those who have no understanding, and that the ignorant would lead the masses. Today, it takes nothing more than an internet connection and a bit of confidence for someone to position themselves as an expert. People who have never studied, never learned from scholars, and never understood the foundations of religion suddenly feel entitled to give opinions on matters that require deep wisdom. And because they speak loudly, because they entertain, because they appeal to emotion, people listen. The world has reached a strange point where wisdom is overlooked, while sensationalism is rewarded. Anyone can say anything, and millions will follow them without question. This is not just a problem, it is a spiritual danger. The teachings of Islam tell us that at the end of times, false voices would rise and true guidance would become harder to find. People would argue endlessly, not to seek truth, but to win debates. Ignorance would spread so widely that people would no longer recognize the difference between knowledge and opinion. And the saddest part is that many people no longer know who to trust, because the world has become a stage where every person pretends to be a teacher. But the truth is simple. Knowledge without humility becomes arrogance, and arrogance leads only to misguidance. This rise of empty voices is one of the most alarming signs of our age, and it is unfolding with a speed that should make every heart reflect. There comes a moment when humanity can no longer ignore the warning signs written into the fabric of the world itself. For centuries, people heard about the increasing natural disasters that would mark the approach of the final hour, but those descriptions felt far away, almost symbolic. Yet now, the world is witnessing such intense and frequent disasters that even those who do not believe in any prophecy feel something unusual is rising. Earthquakes strike regions that were once stable, storms take on violent forms never seen before, droughts destroy entire farmlands, and floods swallow cities within hours. Humanity has reached a point where it recovers from one catastrophe only to be hit with another. Entire communities live in constant fear of the next siren, the next shaking of the earth beneath their feet, the next roar of the ocean rising higher than it ever has. And while the world tries to rationalize these events with scientific explanations, deep inside many hearts there is a whisper that refuses to be silenced. It is the whisper that these events are not random. They are reminders. They are calls for humanity to wake up. When the teachings of Islam describe that natural disasters would increase in frequency and severity, it was never meant to provoke fear but to make people reflect on their place in this world. To realize that all the power, technology, and advancements humanity has achieved mean nothing when the earth decides to tremble, when the sky unleashes its fury, when the balance of nature shifts even slightly. These events break the illusion of control that people cling to. They remind us that despite all our brilliance, we remain fragile beings living in a world where everything can change in a single moment. When a nation that felt untouchable is suddenly brought to its knees by a storm, or when a wealthy city is reduced to rubble by an earthquake, humanity is forced to confront its vulnerability, whether it wants to or not. It is in these moments that people begin to think not just about the physical destruction, but about the spiritual messages behind it. Are these events accidents, or are they signs that the world is shifting closer to the warnings spoken long ago? Alongside the changes in the natural world, another sign emerges within the walls of our homes, one that is even more painful than the shaking of the earth or the rising of the sea. It is the collapse of family ties, the slow but devastating breakdown of relationships that were once sacred. The Prophet described a time when children would rebel against their parents, when respect would fade, when loyalty within families would crumble, and when people would treat outsiders with more kindness than their own blood. Today, this reality has become so common that many accept it as normal. Homes, once filled with warmth and connection, have become silent battlegrounds. Parents feel a growing distance from their children. Children feel misunderstood and neglected, and siblings drift apart as if they were strangers. Technology, although powerful, has played a role in this division, creating illusions of connection while breaking the emotional bonds that hold families together. People can communicate with someone thousands of miles away within seconds, yet struggle to hold a meaningful conversation with someone sitting across the room. Hearts have become hardened. Patience has become thin. Gratitude has become rare. Families break over arguments that would once have been resolved through a single sincere apology. But today, pride outweighs compassion, and egos overshadow love. There are homes filled with material comfort, but empty of emotional connection. Children grow up, seeking validation from strangers instead of turning to their parents. Parents, overwhelmed by stress and responsibilities, sometimes forget that their presence matters more than anything they could ever buy. And in this emotional distance, the family unit weakens, just as the warnings described it would. When the foundation of society begins to crack, everything built upon it becomes unstable. The breakdown of family ties is not just a social issue, it is a spiritual sign, one that reveals a deeper sickness within the human heart. The world is witnessing a generation struggling with identity, loneliness, anxiety, and isolation, not because families are poor, but because families are disconnected. And that disconnection was foretold as one of the signs that the world would drift deeper into chaos before the final hour. But the warnings do not stop there. Another sign that rises unmistakably in our age is humanity's obsession with wealth and materialism. People once lived simple lives, grateful for what little they had, finding peace in modesty and contentment. Today, society has become a global competition where everyone feels pressured to prove their worth through possessions. Houses must be bigger, cars must be newer, clothes must be designer, and every achievement must be displayed for the world to see. Even when people have enough, they still feel empty, because the world has conditioned them to believe that enough does not exist. There is always something more to chase, something better to acquire, something someone else has that you do not. The warnings in Islam describe a time when wealth would become abundant, but blessings would disappear. And this is exactly what the world is experiencing. People earn more than any generation before them, yet they feel constantly tired, constantly stressed, constantly anxious. Families fight over money, friendships end over jealousy, marriages collapse because expectations become unrealistic. Even worse, wealth has become a measure of success, while character has become an afterthought. People judge others by what they own rather than who they are. And nations themselves race to build taller buildings, bigger monuments, and more extravagant displays of power, exactly as described in the prophetic warnings. This obsession with materialism is not a harmless trend. It blinds the heart. It distracts people from their purpose. It makes the temporary world feel permanent, even though every soul knows it is not. When people chase wealth endlessly, they lose touch with what truly matters: gratitude, humility, faith, and good character. The world encourages people to collect things that will not follow them into the grave, while neglecting the deeds and values that will matter when everything else fades. This spiritual emptiness, hidden beneath luxury and abundance, is one of the clearest signs that humanity is drifting deeper into the era foretold long ago. There is a point in every society when the line between right and wrong begins to fade, when what was once condemned becomes tolerated, and what was once tolerated becomes celebrated. We are living in that time. There was an era not long ago when modesty was valued, when people felt ashamed to display their private lives openly, and when dignity was something carefully protected. Today, immorality has become entertainment, spread across screens, platforms, and public spaces with no hesitation and no filter. Behaviors that once shocked entire generations are now normalized to the point where even children grow up thinking they are perfectly acceptable. The teachings of Islam foretold a time when shamelessness would spread, when people would invent new forms of indecency, and when the boundaries set by faith and morality would be trampled without remorse. That time is unfolding right now in front of us. You can see it in the way society defines success, not through character, but through exposure and applause. You can see it in the way people treat their bodies as objects for display rather than trusts from the Creator. You can see it in the way entertainment industries push the limits further every year, making people numb to sins that once caused trembling hearts. And the most dangerous part is that many people no longer notice. What once caused discomfort now feels ordinary. What once felt wrong now feels harmless. When immorality becomes normal, morality becomes strange, and those who hold on to their principles begin to feel like outsiders in their own societies. This shift was clearly described in the end-time prophecies, that modesty would disappear, that indecency would become widespread, and that the world would sink deeper into spiritual darkness while believing it is advancing. People often ask how immorality spreads so fast, but the answer is simple. Sin becomes easy when hearts become distracted and when consequences are forgotten. A society that no longer feels shame is a society moving closer to its downfall, because shame is not a weakness, it is a safeguard, a reminder that the soul still recognizes the difference between purity and corruption. Yet, in the midst of this moral collapse, another strange phenomenon rises: the simultaneous spread of knowledge and ignorance. The world has never had more access to information than it does today. People can search for answers instantly, learn new skills within minutes, and explore ideas that past generations could only dream of. But despite this flood of information, true understanding is becoming rare. People read more but comprehend less. They know facts but lack wisdom. They gather information but fail to transform it into guidance. The teachings of Islam predicted this paradox long before the rise of modern technology, that knowledge would increase, but beneficial knowledge would decline. Today, we see how people use information not to improve their character, but to win arguments, to impress others, or to spread confusion. There are countless voices speaking, but very few hearts listening. People memorize without reflection, they learn without practice, and they debate without understanding. The world is filled with noise but starved of meaning. Many individuals are drowning in a sea of opinions, trying to distinguish truth from falsehood while surrounded by conflicting narratives. And because wisdom has faded, people often choose the loudest voice, not the most knowledgeable one. Scholars who spent decades learning are ignored, while influencers who spent minutes forming an opinion are praised. The heart becomes confused when it is overloaded with information but deprived of sincerity. And this confusion was foretold as a major sign of the end times, when ignorance would spread despite the abundance of knowledge. It is a reminder that true understanding does not come from how much we know, but from how deeply we reflect, how sincerely we seek guidance, and how humbly we act upon what we learn. The rise of superficial knowledge is one of the clearest indicators that humanity is drifting away from wisdom and toward an age of distraction and deception. But perhaps one of the most heartbreaking signs, one that shakes the soul to its core, is the normalization of oppression. Injustice has always existed throughout history, but what the world is witnessing today is unprecedented in its scale and its coldness. Entire populations are stripped of their rights while the world watches in silence. Innocent people suffer because of political agendas, economic greed, or the hunger for power of a small group of individuals. The teachings of Islam warned that oppression would spread so widely near the end times that it would feel as though justice itself had disappeared. Today, that warning feels painfully real. You can see it in the way the powerful exploit the weak without fear of consequence. You can see it in the way the suffering of entire communities is ignored because acknowledging it would be inconvenient. You can see it in the way nations build their strength on the broken backs of those who have no voice. Oppression has become so common that many people no longer react to it. They scroll past images of suffering as if they were ordinary pictures. Their hearts become desensitized, not because they are evil, but because constant exposure to pain without action numbs the soul. And this numbness is one of the most dangerous conditions a society can fall into. When injustice becomes normal and compassion becomes rare, humanity loses its humanity. The Prophet described a time when the oppressors would be honored and the truthful would be silenced, when corruption would spread across governments, and when the cries of the weak would be ignored by those who had the power to help. That time is not approaching, it is already here. In every corner of the world, people are crying out for justice, for peace, for dignity, but their voices are drowned out by the noise of ambition and greed. And while this reality is terrifying, it is also a reminder that these events were foretold, not to break our spirits, but to open our eyes. Because when oppression reaches its peak, when injustice becomes overwhelming, it signals that the world is moving closer to a divine reckoning, closer to the moment when every injustice will be corrected by the one who never forgets, never overlooks, and never fails to bring justice in the end. We live in a time when the extraordinary has become ordinary, when things that once sounded like fantasies now shape our daily lives, and when technologies that earlier generations could not even imagine have become casual tools in our pockets. Yet beneath all the excitement, beneath all the innovation and progress, there is an eerie familiarity to what is unfolding. The teachings of Islam spoke of a world that would shrink, a world in which communication would travel instantly, in which people would see each other across vast distances, in which knowledge would spread as fast as disaster, and in which the boundaries of time and space would appear to collapse. Today, we call it technology. But long before smartphones, satellites, global networks, and artificial intelligence, these descriptions were given to humanity as warnings, reminders that when the world becomes deeply interconnected, the pace of events will accelerate in ways people cannot control. We are living in that era, the era where news from the other side of the world reaches us before we even finish our meals, where images of joy and tragedy cross continents in seconds, and where people experience events happening thousands of miles away as if they were unfolding in their own streets. This was not the world of our grandparents, and certainly not the world of the early generations. The rapid travel foretold long ago has become a daily routine as people cross oceans in mere hours, witnessing sunrise in one country and sunset in another with barely any effort. The world has truly become a global village, a place where distance is no longer a barrier, where human beings interact on a scale that would have once been unimaginable. But this interconnectedness also comes with consequences, spiritual consequences, emotional consequences, and moral consequences. People are no longer exposed only to the culture of their own communities. They are exposed to the entire world's diversity, temptations, ideologies, and conflicts, all simultaneously. Hearts become overwhelmed, minds become overstimulated, and the line between right and wrong becomes harder to protect. The prophetic descriptions of the end times mention confusion, chaos, and fitan spreading rapidly, like wildfire. And what spreads faster than information in our era? A single rumor, a single lie, a single spark of conflict can travel across nations in seconds and influence millions. Falsehood travels at the speed of light, while truth often struggles to catch up. Never in human history has this been more visibly true than today. Technologies that were created to connect us have also exposed us, weakened our attention spans, fragmented our focus, and flooded our hearts with a constant stream of noise. People feel more connected but more alone, more informed but more confused, more empowered but more spiritually empty. And this imbalance is not accidental, it is a sign. A sign that the world is shifting toward the conditions described in the end-time prophecies, conditions in which people will be distracted from their purpose, obsessed with illusions, and trapped in a cycle of comparison and dissatisfaction. Even the advancement of artificial intelligence and genetic manipulation echoes warnings about human beings trying to exceed their limits, altering creation, and pursuing knowledge without considering whether they should. Technology is not evil, but it becomes dangerous when it disconnects people from their creator and from their humanity. And when humanity reaches a point where it trusts machines more than moral wisdom, when humans rely on algorithms more than conscience, when people lose themselves in digital identities rather than authentic ones, this too becomes a sign that the world is heading toward a spiritual crisis far deeper than any technological advancement can solve. In the midst of this rapid transformation, a different kind of storm begins to rise, one not made of wind or fire, but of trials that shake the heart. The teachings of Islam describe a time when fitan, tests, tribulations, and confusion would appear like the pieces of a broken necklace, falling one after another with no pause between them. Today, we are witnessing this pattern with almost painful clarity. Wars erupt in one region just as another conflict begins to settle. Pandemics strike unexpectedly, disrupting the entire world and revealing how fragile our systems truly are. Economies collapse, families break apart, societies polarize, and hearts feel increasingly heavy as people struggle to keep up with the constant pace of global turmoil. Many people find themselves emotionally exhausted, spiritually drained, and mentally overwhelmed. Not because they lack faith, but because the world has become a place of constant instability. This feeling itself is a sign. The Prophet described a time when people would wake up believers and go to sleep in doubt, when a person's faith would be pulled from them like a thread, slowly and subtly, until they no longer recognize what they once believed. The intensity of the trials today reflects this prophecy, forcing people to confront dilemmas that earlier generations were never exposed to. People are pressured to compromise their values, to accept falsehood, to remain silent in the face of injustice, and to adapt to a world where morality is constantly shifting. The fitan of our era are not only physical or political, they are emotional and spiritual, striking at the deepest level of the human soul. You see it in the rise of anxiety, in the spread of depression, in the increase of loneliness, in the loss of purpose that so many people silently endure. When hearts become unsettled and minds become clouded, even small trials feel like mountains. And when global trials strike repeatedly, people lose the sense of stability that gives them strength. This is why the Hadith describes the end times as a period of turbulence, where peace becomes rare and clarity becomes precious. People will desperately search for guidance, for truth, for meaning, but the noise of the world will make it difficult to find. The constant cycle of crises makes people numb, and this numbness is dangerous because it makes the soul passive, tired, and vulnerable. A heart that is overwhelmed is a heart that is easily swayed, and the fitan of this era are designed to overwhelm. They come from every direction, testing patience, testing faith, testing relationships, testing hope. Yet even in these trials, there is a hidden reminder. The closer the world gets to the final hour, the more intense the signs become, not to terrify humanity, but to awaken it. Every difficulty is a whisper calling the soul back to its creator, reminding us that the world was never meant to be a place of permanent comfort. The storms that shake the earth, the conflicts that shake nations, and the emotional struggles that shake the heart, all serve one purpose: to push humanity toward reflection, humility, and return. Because when the world becomes overwhelming, people finally realize that the only true source of peace comes from the one who created it. There comes a moment, after reflecting on all the signs, all the warnings, and all the shifting realities of our world, when a person cannot help but ask the question that echoes across every heart. Are these signs meant to terrify us, or are they meant to awaken us? And the truth is that every prophecy, every description, every warning about the final hour was revealed not to create fear, but to inspire transformation. The world today moves at a relentless pace, filled with distractions that pull people away from their purpose, away from their faith, and away from their own inner clarity. It is easy to become lost in the noise, overwhelmed by uncertainty, or numbed by the constant cycle of crises. But in reality, these signs serve as reminders, as lanterns in the darkness, guiding humanity back to what truly matters. People often imagine the end times as a distant event, a story for some future generation, but every generation is given its own signs, its own warnings, its own opportunities to reflect before the final chapters of history unfold. Our generation is no different, but the intensity and clarity of the signs today make them impossible to overlook. When morality collapses, when truth becomes blurred, when oppression becomes normalized, when disasters shake the boss, earth, when technology dominates life, and when trials come one after another with no pause, the heart begins to understand that the world is shifting in a way described long ago. But even as the signs become more pronounced, the mercy of Allah remains even more apparent because He never allows darkness to rise without giving humanity a path back to light. One of the greatest tragedies of this age is that many people see the signs but remain spiritually asleep, distracted by comfort, lost in routine, or numbed by entertainment. The world has made it easy to avoid reflection, easy to avoid accountability, easy to avoid the deeper questions that truly matter. But the signs of Qiyamah were meant to awaken those who are capable of listening with their hearts, not just their eyes. They were meant to shake people awake, to break the illusion that life is guaranteed, that time is endless, that the dunya is permanent. Every earthquake that splits the ground, every injustice that breaks hearts, every moral shift that confuses minds, every technological change that overwhelms the soul is a reminder that the world is temporary, fragile, and constantly moving toward its final destiny. Yet these reminders are not only about fear, they are about hope. They remind us that no matter how chaotic the world becomes, every sincere prayer is heard, every good deed is recorded, every moment of repentance is accepted, and every act of kindness carries a weight that outlives the temporary world. When a person sees the signs and chooses to return to Allah, that choice itself becomes a victory, a renewal of purpose, a reclaiming of the heart from the hands of the dunya. But the journey of reflection does not end with recognizing the signs. The real question is, what will you do with this awareness? Some people see the signs and fall into panic, fear, or hopelessness, believing that the world is too far gone, or that their actions no longer matter. But this mindset contradicts the very essence of faith. The Prophet made it clear that even if the final hour were about to come and a believer had a seedling in their hand, they should plant it. This single teaching reveals something profound, that no matter how close the world is to its end, goodness still matters, effort still matters, sincerity still matters. There is no moment in history where the believer becomes useless or powerless. Even in the darkest times, perhaps especially in the darkest times, the light of a believer's actions becomes even more precious. In a world drowning in confusion, clarity becomes worship. In a world drowning in sin, repentance becomes strength. In a world drowning in distractions, focus becomes victory. And in a world drowning in fear, trust in Allah becomes a shield that no chaos can break. This era we are living in is filled with tests, but every test carries an opportunity to rise. It is easy to look at the world and feel overwhelmed, to wonder why everything feels so unstable, to feel unsure of your place in such turbulent times. But Allah chose you to live in this generation, with all its challenges, because He knows what your heart is capable of. You were not placed in this time by accident. You were placed here with a purpose, to be among those who recognize the signs and choose to return to Him before it is too late. To be among those who remain firm when others fall into confusion. To be among those who protect their family, their faith, their humility, and their sincerity in a world that is constantly trying to pull them away. This is not a time to panic, it is a time to prepare. A time to purify the heart, strengthen your connection with Allah, and build habits that will protect you when the fitan grow even stronger. A time to make repentance a daily routine, gratitude a constant practice, and prayer a source of peace rather than a ritual performed without thought. The believers of the end times are not defined by fear. They are defined by resilience, clarity, and determination. And perhaps the most powerful reminder of all is that the signs of Qiyamah do not only signal the end of the world, they also signal the beginning of a return. A return to sincerity, a return to humility, a return to faith that is free from hypocrisy, a return to families reconnecting, hearts softening, souls awakening, and believers remembering why they were created. The signs are not punishments, they are invitations. Invitations to come back before the door closes. Invitations to save what can still be saved. Invitations to meet Allah with a heart that is alive, aware, and sincere. The world may be moving toward its final chapter, but every soul still has the chance to write its own ending with honor, faith, and hope. So as the signs unfold, do not be among those who watch with numb hearts or distracted minds. Be among those who understand, who act, who pray, who seek forgiveness, who give charity, who repair relationships, who stand for justice, and who cling tightly to the truth even when the world lets go. Because when the final moments arrive, it will not matter how much wealth you accumulated, how many followers you had, or how much the world praised you. What will matter is the state of your heart, the sincerity of your deeds, and the strength of your faith. And if the signs of Qiyamah teach us anything, it is this: that the greatest preparation for the end is not fear, it is returning to Allah with a heart full of light, before the world's light begins to fade.